Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Welcome to this episode of Living the Gospel of Life. I'm your host, Leticia Velasquez. Today we have as a guest Claudia Catani, a pro-life activist in Connecticut. And she's got a great story to tell, as well as her views of the current film Gosnell. So let's begin with a prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Holy Spirit. Amen.
O Mary, bright dawn of the new world, Mother of the living, to you do we entrust the cause of life. Look down, O Mother, upon the vast numbers of babies not allowed to be born, of the poor whose lives are made difficult, of men and women who are victims of brutal violence, of the elderly and sick killed by indifference or out of misguided mercy. Grant that all who believe in your Son may proclaim the gospel of life with honesty and love to the people of our time. Obtain for them the grace to accept that gospel as a gift ever new, the joy of celebrating it with gratitude throughout their lives, and the courage to bear witness to it resolutely, in order to build, together with all people of goodwill, the civilization of truth and love, to the praise and glory of God, the Creator and Lover of life. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. So I've been practicing saying the word Nevada. Did I say it right, Claudia?
You did say it right, yes.
Yay! We East Coasters and probably the rest of the country don't know how to say. I usually say Nevada. I guess that's because in Spanish, Nevada would be snowed, in Spanish. Right. So as it's originally a Spanish word, right, named after the mountains in the desert.
Yep.
The Sierra
but the
Nevada.
The Sierra Nevada, but the locals are very insistent upon Nevada.
Okay,
and, we have to do it right.
That's right. We want to give them praise. So, did you start out in Nevada, or did you move there?
Well, I started my pro-life work there because I moved there in '73, and Roe v. Wade came to be in '74.
Okay.
I wasn't immediately aware of what had happened until just a couple of years later.
So how did you get involved?
Well, actually, at first, I was pregnant with my daughter, and someone that I worked with said, "Oh, you can just go to Planned Parenthood. They do free pregnancy tests." And I still had no idea or made any connection with abortion. It just never crossed my mind that there were places actually doing that. And I went and I had the test, but right after the test, she just said, "So did you want to continue or terminate?" Very matter-of-factly, and I just really didn't know what she was talking about. I said, "Well, you did say I was pregnant, right?" "Well, yes, but did you want to continue or terminate?" And then it started to hit me, and I got really upset because I really wanted this baby. I'd been trying to get pregnant, and I was very happy about it. And I left there, and that's when I started relaying this to people, and then they started telling me, "Well, they do abortions there." So that got me.
So you were hit full in the face with the reality of abortion without even realizing it was part of American life. That must have been a shock.
Yep. Absolutely. And I really thought that as soon as people knew about this, it was just going to come to an end, because I was just outraged. I thought, people just don't know about this. I didn't know about it. Nobody talks about it. And I soon found out that that was not to be the case. It would last a very long time.
Yeah, we're still dealing with that reality, aren't we?
We are.
Don't care.
It's very, very sad. Yeah, they accept it. It's. I think there's just a lot of complacency, and we've become desensitized to it. As soon as people hear the word abortion, they associate it immediately with women's rights, and it's difficult to keep them focused on the baby. Look at the baby.
Yeah, they call it health care, women's health care. So killing your child, killing is now part of health care.
Absolutely. And the deception is, right, I mean, Margaret Sanger began that deception when Planned Parenthood first came to be as a population control center. And she soon realized that the name was going to be difficult for people to accept. And she changed it, but it didn't change their mission.
I believe she started it as the Birth Control League, am I right?
Birth Control League and a Population Control Society Center. It was, that was the main theme in her mind, and that was the true theme, I believe. But
eugenics.
Right.
Making sure only the right people have babies.
Absolutely. And even Justice Ginsburg has reiterated that. Those very words of Margaret Sanger's. Well, you know that there are some people.
She said we all knew that abortion was there so that we could reduce the populations of people that we didn't want too much of, meaning the poor, the minorities, certain races, certain ethnicities, some of our immigrant ancestors from Eastern and Southern Europe. Margaret Sanger was of Irish descent, and they thought that Northern Europeans were superior intellectually, so that they should reproduce, but the rest of us shouldn't. Italians and Slavs and Hispanics, blacks, Asians should not reproduce. And guess what? Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, just made a comment against overpopulation in Africa. You see, Africans don't have a problem with that, but the white people in Europe do, because they don't want too many Africans. So they said that show me a well-educated woman with and she won't have 7 or 8 children. So he prompted a prompt response by Catholic University professor Catherine Packard, who said, I have 7 children and a PhD, thank you very much. And she started a hashtag called Postcards for Macron. And thousands of us responded with our college degrees and how many babies we had. I've been lucky enough to conceive 6. Only 3 didn't make it. 3 are with our Lord, and I have 3 beautiful daughters. No. But we all sent a response to President Macron saying, it's not just dummies who have large families, and it's not just Africans, and it's not a sign of lower intelligence, but people like Margaret Sanger, who came from a large family. Saw that reducing population and killing babies through birth control or abortion was a way to make women free. And that's carried through to this day.
Oh, absolutely, to where now they ridicule stay-at-home moms as if, they're taking something from society instead of the large contribution that they make to society. This is how they're trying to change people's minds. Women should be out there working, not having babies. They put it down where,
that's right. We're leeches, according to a Senate candidate, Cinema, a woman, I believe it's Kristen, has said that stay-at-home moms are leeches. She said that back in 2006, and that's coming back to haunt her because everybody knows that raising children well is a useless profession. It doesn't pay well, I'll admit that. But if you had to pay someone to do what a mother does, you'd be out a lot of money, that's for sure, at least to do it well.
Right. Well, according to Hillary, the village will do it for you.
Yeah.
And apparently they think they can do a better job. They just keep cutting parents more and more out of the picture with children and making them supposedly more independent, but actually more dependent on government for direction.
That's right, because they haven't been brought up with any self-reliance or belief in their ability to do anything by themselves, that they're nothing without government. And that serves the people on that party very well, because then they have to be reelected because you can't survive without them. I believe in some ways the government, the left-wing government, has become the parent and the husband, that we've ripped apart families through birth control and abortion, and now they don't have fathers and they don't have husbands, so the government steps in and says, well, we have a program for you. Just vote for us, and we will continue to support you and pay for your education. See, these are things husbands and fathers are supposed to do. But when they're not there, and I'm not saying we should abandon widows and fatherless children. Of course not. That's what a government is for, those that can't help themselves. But we're creating it to the point that I just read that up to 50% of Americans are born out of wedlock now. 50% have no reliable father in the home. So that's,
Yep,
and some of it by choice and some of it by men running away. It's hard to tell what, because sometimes, people don't tell the truth. But anyway, so back to you in Nevada, being faced with abortion as the new law of the land. So what was your first time that you got involved in pro-life?
Well, after I had my daughter and she was about 2 years old, we started picketing. We started hearing about, people picketing in front of Planned Parenthood. And then in church, my Monsignor asked after Mass one day that people that were seriously committed to pro-life work, if they would stay afterwards, he'd like to have a talk with them. And so I did. And he said, "We're going to get arrested.
Ooh.
If anybody wants to leave now, please leave now before we go into the details." And quite a few people left.
Oh, I can imagine. That's pretty scary.
Yeah, they walked out like, well, that's not what they expected. It wasn't what I expected at all. I'd never heard of Operation.
Hear in the back of church, after Mass, having a donut and a cup of coffee. Hey, you want to get arrested? It takes especially courageous people to stay, Claudia.
Or curious, my Monsignor's up there. So this wasn't just the guy on the street. And so and all our priests were there. And he talked about Operation Rescue, and they had a plan, and they had a night, and, at 3 in the morning, and we were going to meet, and everybody that wants to be there. And we did. And there were people outside praying, and that Operation Rescue started it for me, getting me really involved.
Could you explain that? There may be people that haven't heard of Operation Rescue. What is that? It's a movement that started in, what year was that, in the 80s or late 70s?
It was about 88, I believe.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And I'm not exactly sure.
I believe it was Randall Terry who started it. But what was their premise? Like, what was their philosophy?
Well, it was a wake-up call for America, because myself and and I was pretty plugged into church, but still had no idea what was going on. It was just very hush. And this was a wake-up call to America, because it finally put it out there on the front pages, and people were asking questions. And even at church, they were saying, well, what do you mean they're doing abortions? And when the truth started coming out, people were shocked. And that's what Operation Rescue did. It was literally stop people at the doors. And God is so gracious that he would show us these saves at time. And in fact, 28 years later, one of the police officers that came to arrest us on one morning, that there were 92 of us.
Let me be specific. Claudia, you broke the law intentionally in civil disobedience by blocking the entrance to abortion clinics, correct?
Correct.
And how did you do that, so in case people don't know? Did you lock arms? Did you sit down?
We did. We arrived at about 4 in the morning, and we, after intense prayer and fasting, and we locked arms, as many of us as we could, to block the whole entrance, and we just stayed put. Mm-hmm. And once the police arrived, everyone just went limp. There was no walking. There was only praying. No one ever said anything. We never, it was very, very peaceful, and we were in prayer or singing hymns the whole time.
So it's very much like a college sit-in in the 60s, or Martin Luther King's civil disobedience. It was, at least Martin Luther King's civil disobedience was quiet and prayerful and not violent.
Absolutely.
There was no screaming and yelling, no throwing things, hitting people like you see today. It was just passive resistance to the killing of the innocent unborn.
Absolute silence as far as saying anything other than prayer. And all of our priests, our bishop, the people from the church were out there praying the rosary. They were all on the sidewalk. As we were up against the doors, they were all on the sidewalk, and there were quite a few there. There could be 100 there or more. So it,
wow, that's quite an impressive presence, Claudia.
It is. It is. And in Las Vegas, the pastor, the bishop from the Catholic Church, and the bishop from the Mormon church that is quite large there, and the rabbi over all the synagogues there all came together to pray at these events. It was very
ecumenical.
Yes, it was very well participated by all of the churches, and I was amazed at the outpouring. And babies were saved.
Of course.
I was going to say 28 years later, when this, well, I keep going past this, one of the police officers that came to arrest us handed over his gun and badge to another officer and made a statement that he could not, he took his oath to protect lives, and he could not protect these babies, and he sat down with us.
Wow. Did he lose his job?
Oh, yeah. It was a big...
What courage. That's amazing.
Big to-do over that. And he's still involved. And he lost his job and just was committed afterwards to that. And as I say, 28 years later, a girl came forward who was at that time 17 and on her way in to abort her son. She came back 3 times, and we were there, or the sidewalk counselors were there, and they finally took care of her needs. She needed a place to stay. She was being thrown out of the house. A Christian couple took her in, and but we didn't know this at the time. This came out 28 years later when she came on Facebook. She had seen something on there about Chet Gallagher, who was the police officer, and she said, I was there that day. You stopped me from going in, and I want you all to know that I have a beautiful son, 28-year-old son, wow, and a 2-year-old grandson that I would never
wow,
have had if you had not been there. And she had pictures of them, and it was just incredible that 28 years later this was revealed to us in a crazy way, like on social media.
Social media is amazing. It can be good and bad, you know.
It is, and to share stories like that, it was other people that had been there that day, and some people had pictures from that day, and but to see her son and grandson and to know what a difference that made, it was worth it for, you know, all the arrests in the world.
Well, the Jewish people say to save one life is to make your life worthwhile. I mean, that's all you need to do in your lifetime, and you've saved probably many. You'll never know until you get to heaven. Well, in union with your friends and all the pro-life you worked in. So you went from Operation Rescue to working in a pregnancy center, correct? Or did you found one?
Well, one of my friends and I got very involved with, we wanted to get this into the churches. Now we wanted to get the word out because so many other churches weren't involved. We started going around, and I go back even today, and it's been 20 years later more, and they have these little groups, and most the churches have a crib or a cradle or something near the altar, to the side of the altar, that's collecting things for the crisis pregnancy centers every week. They're all really involved, and they're doing God's work. They're out there saving babies. They're still in front of the clinics and sending them to the centers, and that's all we can do is try to save them one at a time. We can't rescue anymore because, of course, they've got all these new RICO laws and everything that you're not going to just get off on, for civil disobedience anymore.
No, civil disobedience is only for the left. They can block entrances, and they can create chaos in the halls of Congress and bang on the Supreme Court door and create pandemonium in the Senate floor when the vote was being taken for Kavanaugh. And that's okay, but if you want to protest abortion, you're in trouble. I don't know if you had this slogan, but we had this slogan. I didn't participate in Operation Rescue. I was a little younger. I was still in school. But they used to have, I believe, a slogan, be a hero, save a whale, save a baby, go to jail.
Oh, that was on my bumper sticker.
Yeah.
That was on my bumper sticker.
Well, yeah, I think that was from Operation Rescue. It just shows you where our priorities are. I have nothing against whales, but I do believe that human beings are made in the image and likeness of God as a Catholic, and they come first. And if we have to choose between the two, God permits us to use animals, not to kill them indiscriminately and not to destroy an entire species, but certainly to use them for the good of humankind. And babies never, ever, ever need to be killed. Former Surgeon General C. Everett Koop said in all his years of medicine, he never saw a case where a baby had to be killed to save the life of the mother. Never, ever, ever. And a baby can be brought early if the mother's life is in danger. Let's say there's high blood pressure or something. But that's not killing the baby. That's giving the baby a shot at life, perhaps a little early, but it's not killing the baby. He referred to direct abortion, which you go in to kill the baby. Not go in, even in the case of ectopic pregnancy, you have to remove the unborn child in the tube, but you're not going in there to kill the child. It's not direct killing. It's and only in the case of a life-threatening, which ectopic is a life-threatening condition. But you're never going in there saying, I have to kill the child, because sometimes the child can be saved. And with all the technology we have 24-week babies that are surviving more and more. We're even developing artificial wombs. So it's never a case of choosing the life of the child over the mother. That's that's a red herring. That's not the case.
Oh, absolutely.
It might have been the case 100 years ago, but it's not now. And so with all the technology
because they thought it was. Right.
Perhaps. But now we don't need to do that. We have all this technology, and we have thousands of parents waiting to adopt children. So you worked in a pregnancy center there in Las Vegas?
Well, I didn't. I volunteered, but mostly for me it was on the street. The street work, more the counseling on the sidewalk counseling, and getting other churches set up and trying to get them organized. And that worked out very well because there's a group within every church that's still working today to provide and educate, keep things going, and keep people abreast of what's happening. And that's what we're trying to do here now.
Hey, Claudia, while I was talking to you, I looked up Chet Gallagher on Facebook, and I found out we're friends. I'm going to follow him now. So he's there on Facebook, that police officer who handed in his gun and his badge to save babies, and he's still working at it. He's working at
still doing it.
Yeah, he's still going at Abortion Abolitionist. He's a local chapter director and leadership team at Operation Save America. So all those years now, 30 years. I started in the 70s being active in my high school, and then kept active a little bit less during college years. And then I was influenced in the Catholic schools. I was influenced a little bit by the left. I was a little embarrassed to be pro-life. My friends, after I left St. Anselm College, started a pro-life group. St. Anselm College in Manchester, New Hampshire is a very interesting place because the New Hampshire primary is the second primary in the nation, and very often if someone has a win in Iowa, they go to New Hampshire to sort of solidify it, So being in southern New Hampshire, the most populous part of the state, St. Anselm has seen its share of candidate debates. So my friends started holding pro-life signs out, especially when you had pro-abortion Republicans or Democrats, are almost always pro-abortion, protesting them in the name of the Catholic faith, and it was so it was great that they were doing that. But I was a coward in those days. But I got some courage later on. But I was never brave enough to rescue. That's really my hat's off to you. So how
you were
how
young
did
then.
Yeah, you were young and bold, and you're still bold. Trust me, I know. We'll talk about that more later. But you moved to the New England area, to Connecticut, because of a retreat you went on. Tell us about it, Claudia.
I did. I was here visiting my sister, and I went to a morning mass over at St. Agnes, and a gentleman there was handing out flyers after mass for a retreat at my father's house in Moodus with Father Pavone, Father Frank Pavone from Priests for Life. And I had been a member of Priests for Life and been getting all of his information for years prior to that. So when I saw that Father Pavone was going to be there, I was really excited about it. And, excuse me, and I decided to attend. It was that upcoming weekend, so I quickly made that decision, and I went. And they sat me at his table for meals, so I had a chance to really talk to him several times, one-on-one, about the work in Las Vegas, and he kept saying how much they needed work here in Connecticut, which was the last place I would ever move to.
It's a big change.
And yes, and so I went home not home, back to my sister's, and kept thinking about it. And Monday morning I went for my usual walk and went by this little tiny cottage, and it said for sale by owner. And I'd walk by it every day that I'd been here visiting. All of a sudden, Monday morning, that sign was up. And
wow.
I found myself calling, yes, thinking, I do not want to live in Connecticut. And God just kept saying, you're going to buy that house. You're going to live here.
Wow.
And you know when God does that, when you don't want to, you do it under duress. You know, I had a hard time understanding that. Well, why would you do something you don't want to do because you think God wants you to do it? Boy, you know when he wants you to do it. There's no questioning it. And I went through the motions thinking, I really don't want to live here. But here I am in Connecticut.
Well, we're grateful that you are, because you've done great work here in Connecticut. So how did you get involved in what Father Pavone said was the necessary work in Connecticut?
Well, I immediately went to the pastor of my church once I moved here. I didn't actually move into the house for a year because I wasn't prepared for that yet. And I went, and there really wasn't much going on at all. And I started writing articles for our bulletin. I asked him if I could do that and put some information in. And I just kept trying to call around and ask doctors which ones were pro-life, and checked on my own candidates in the area that I was living, and just tried to get a feel for what I was dealing with in my new surroundings. And I could see.
Were you discouraged about how anti-life or how pro-death Connecticut is? And this is what, in the 90s?
Yes. This was in 2000. I moved here in 2001.
Okay.
Yeah, just before 9/11.
Oh.
And yeah, and I thought, you know, boy, they call Las Vegas Sin City. That's kind of a joke.
On Connecticut.
Because, you know, they were just so on fire there, the churches and the outpouring of support. And, you know, when you prayed in front of Planned Parenthood, you were not alone. There were a lot of people there. And it was very, very different here. But little by little, I started, I would hear about a pro-life mass at the cathedral, so I would go to that, try to meet people. And, you know, you just look for wherever you can do something. I realized that, you know, checked with the centers, Birthright, CareNet, and to see which ones were around me, what their needs were. And I always felt that on an individual basis, if we can just try to educate the people in our own church first and rally the support to support the crisis pregnancy centers, that's a big start. Because once they understand what's going on and once they start providing for these babies and these moms, they're going to take the next step to get out there and abortion, do what they can there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you find that that sort of brings people that weren't aware of abortion in to face the realities of it.
I think that's important. I find more and more as I talk to people that they just don't know. They absolutely are aghast when they find out that abortion is legal for all 9 months. They argue, well, that cannot be, because I believe most people really don't know. We did door-to-door in Las Vegas before we had this question 7 came up. And
what was question 7,
people.
Claudia? What was the
that
what
was
proposed?
a disaster. That locked Nevada in. It was a referendum vote to protect abortion. And
so
we knew
if Roe were overturned, would Nevada still have abortion? Is that what that was?
Oh, yeah. Well, it all goes to the states, correct? So each state now has their own laws. But Nevada the lawmakers cannot legislate anything because of the referendum. The only way a referendum can be overturned is by another referendum, which is direct vote of the people. So we always had a lot of questions on our ballots when we went on Election Day. But it's difficult to get the true information. Most people thought they were simply protecting a woman's right, and we just had a hard time
let me guess. NARAL and Planned Parenthood brought forward all the heartbreaking cases where a baby wouldn't survive past birth, right? Or the mother was raped or something like that, because, that's like, 1% of the cases, but they make it sound like, those women would be forced to have children.
Right, and it's rare and safe, and, just one lie after another. It's just very difficult even to get the question worded so that people could understand it. And if they didn't know anything ahead of time before going into that booth, I'm sure they were quite confused going in there, because they even worded it so that you actually had to answer no.
Yeah. Oh, right.
To a yes. It was, they twisted it around. And
you sound mean and restrictive and anti-women. They put you in that position, right? For pro-lifers, that's our life story. We always have to vote no. When there was something that we could actually vote yes on, we were shocked. What do you mean we were in favor of something? Because the laws were always phrased that way deliberately to make the voter feel like, oh, I can't do this. I can't vote against women's health, right?
Right. But, it was a very dark time for us to have that pass. And it locked it in there. So now, hopefully, what I'm wondering is, beyond overturning Roe v. Wade, if the question of personhood should come to the Supreme Court, how that will affect all the states, because once the blacks were given personhood, then the individual states couldn't still have slavery. And so I'm hoping...
you can't enslave a human being. In order to suppress or kill somebody, you have to dehumanize them. We did that with slaves, with the Dred Scott decision, saying that a slave was property and not a human being. The Nazis did it with Jews, calling them vermin. So you have to dehumanize your enemy, and I'm sure it was done by all the dictators, from Pol Pot to Mao Zedong to all the people at Stalin that killed millions and millions of people. They had to make the enemies feel like, well, it happened in Rwanda with the Hutus and Tutsis, that these people are they're rats, they're insects. They're property, and the baby is seen as the property, as part of the mother's body. I've heard the baby described as a polyp, a cancer, a tumor, a leech, what's the other thing they use? Parasite. Because sure, the baby's living off the mother, and a child will be dependent on their parents for a number of years. I mean, that's just the way human life is, and all of us were on our own parents. But no one is saying that a woman that gives birth has to raise the child. There's plenty of people that would be more than willing to love that child for life.
Absolutely.
And they can't find children to adopt. It's very hard.
No, this is why they have to go to China and spend $30,000-$40,000. Right. But that's where I think we have to is finally make people realize that these are human beings. These are people that feel pain. That I don't understand why the left can be so compassionate towards animals, even animals that have to be euthanized, terrorists, criminals that are on death row. There's all this compassion, and none of them should suffer. Even if they have to die, they should not suffer.
That's
but
right.
No one bothers to look at this baby. It's like, okay, if you think it's okay, well, have you looked to see if there's pain involved? Because
even when they try and pass. Even when they try and pass bills to give anesthesia to later-term babies that we have proven after 20 weeks that they can feel pain, it's definitely after 20 weeks. Before 20 weeks, we're not quite sure. Then there's objections from the pro-abort community because that tends to humanize, right? Because then, well, if the baby can feel pain, then somebody might start thinking the baby is actually human, which, of course, from the moment of conception, that baby was human. What else could it be, a cat? I mean, it's a human being. It's just a different stage of development, as I am now, and a different stage in development than I was yesterday. I mean, we're all on a continuum of development. But society has become very eugenic in saying that, we don't want these colored people, we don't want young babies that are in our way, and we don't want older people that are starting to get expensive on our healthcare system. So we're going to eliminate, we're going to offer them euthanasia or physician-assisted suicide, which becomes euthanasia. In Toronto, their Children's Hospital is threatening to euthanize children without parental permission. Who in their right mind would bring their child to that hospital? Why would you bother? If your child could be killed, if they're deemed unworthy of life by some reason, maybe their cure is expensive, or maybe their cure isn't permanent, like giving a child with cancer more time to live. So for whatever reason, that doctor could euthanize your child legally. It's just terrifying.
There's no end to it, and we're seeing that with euthanasia and assisted suicide, and so babies really, even when they know that it's a baby and it's a full-term baby, we saw all the testimony right on television when Clinton was in for partial birth abortion, and I thought, well, now, wow, it's right on TV. They can actually see how they described the whole procedure. It was horrible. And yet Clinton vetoed it twice. So
sometimes
even that reality doesn't change things.
Yeah, but the good news is that abortion started to go down in the 90s. I think part of it was the pregnancy centers. Part of it was that testimony because people's eyes were opened that in partial birth abortion, there's a danger of a late-term baby being delivered alive. And we'll get into that in a minute. But what partial birth abortion does is it delivers the baby breech, keeps the head inside the mother, punctures the back of the skull with scissors, and the doctor inserts a curette to suck out the baby's brain so that the skull will collapse. And then the baby is born. So that procedure itself was banned. There's debate whether that actually saved life, but what it did do is it woke America up to a large extent of what abortion really is, that there is a baby, a formed baby, not a blob of cells. Even from the very earliest, a couple of weeks, there's a heartbeat and there's limbs beginning to form. I mean, it's just amazing how advanced human beings are and how early independent movement takes place. And people just don't know. Why? Because the media blacks it out. It's not popular in universities to be pro-life. I think studies have shown over 90% of faculty are pro-abortion. So you're not going to hear it in public schools. There are many Catholic schools that won't share this. I remember the nuns in my Catholic girls' high school were very uncomfortable when my friend and I started a pro-life club. And we wanted to be like you, out on the picket lines in the days of Operation Rescue. And we were told, wrap up soaps and give it to the nursing homes, which is a lovely thing to do and sing Christmas carols. But it wasn't what we wanted to do, all right? That was another, end-of-life care. I understand that, but it was less controversial. the church very often can disappoint us in her fear of being controversial. But let me tell you somebody who's not. I always read a passage from the encyclical The Gospel of Life, Pope St. John Paul II's encyclical in 1995.
Oh, beautiful.
And here's what he says. The moral gravity of procured abortion is apparent in all its truth if we recognize that we're dealing with murder, and in particular when we consider the specific elements involved. The one eliminated is a human being at the very beginning of life. No one more absolute innocent could be imagined. In no way could this human being ever be considered an aggressor, much less an unjust aggressor. He or she is weak, defenseless, even to the point of lacking the minimal form of defense consisting in the poignant power of a newborn baby's cries and tears. Here's an aside. In Bernard Nathanson, a former abortionist who died a Catholic pro-lifer, he did a movie years ago, which I'm sure you remember, called The Silent Scream, and he shows an ultrasound abortion, and the baby's trying to get away from the suction, which will tear it limb from limb, and the baby's mouth is open in a scream, but because the baby's inside the mother, in the fluid of the womb, the scream cannot be heard. So John Paul's referring to that scream there. They can't even scream, so they can't defend themselves in any way. The unborn child is totally entrusted to the protection and care of the woman carrying him or her in the womb. And yet sometimes it is precisely the mother herself who makes a decision and asks for the child to be eliminated and then goes about having it done. And Pope Francis recently likened it to having a hitman kill somebody, sort of a mafia hit. But, even the mafia, I don't think, would kill an unborn child. I mean, I don't know. I'm not justifying them. But usually the reason they kill somebody is that person has offended them in some way, real or imagined. But an unborn baby has done nothing, as John Paul says. So our church teaching on abortion is very clear. I think what it is that it makes you a pariah when you're pro-life. And very few of us really relish being a pariah. We don't want to be an outsider and be deemed a nut job, an extremist. So let's get really quickly to the movie Gosnell. I wanted to mention that today because it's out in the theaters. And who is Kermit Gosnell, Claudia? Maybe you can tell the audience. Dr. Kermit Gosnell.
He was an abortionist in Philadelphia in a very poor black neighborhood. And his clinic was absolutely appalling. That really shocked me. I didn't realize how bad that was. Like, who would go in there? But these poor women did. And he didn't care so much about the money. I think he just really relished killing these babies because he would save body parts but he actually did such late-term abortions that many of them were born alive, and he
and at an age where they could survive.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, these were full-term babies.
So if he had cared for them, if he could have cared for them, or at least handed them over to a hospital, they'd still be alive now. We're talking 24, 25, 26 weeks, almost full-term babies. And what did he do to them when they were born alive? So now we've gone from the crime of abortion, which is an illegal crime, but it's a moral crime, to an actual crime, infanticide.
Correct. Right.
And it's all by a few inches. The baby moves a few inches down the birth canal, and all of a sudden that baby is what? A human being with rights. So he had to snip the necks with a scissor. He snipped without anesthesia. He literally beheaded these babies.
Killed these children. Yes, he did. Yes, he did. And
that's not what got him arrested. Because the state health department under a pro-abortion Republican Governor Tom Ridge was told, do not do inspections of this filthy clinic. And when you say filthy, you didn't mention the cats that were roaming around with feces everywhere. Baby bodies everywhere. Baby bodies in bags
of human baby parts, just terrible conditions, and these women would be up in small rooms. It was like a converted house, just in filthy
And there was a separate
conditions.
waiting room for black women and a better waiting room for white women.
Yes.
This is a black doctor treating women differently. He reused instruments. that were meant for single use, so they were not sterilized. There was blood on the walls, on the seats, on the chairs. He had teenagers, high school girls administering anesthesia.
Trained them with a color chart,
A color chart. He gave them a few minutes of training. This should have been done at least by an RN, if not by a nurse anesthetist. And he didn't bother to show up until the women were already prepped, so they were ready to just go in and do the abortion. And one time in the movie Gosnell just came out last week, he was actually being investigated for being a pill mill. He produced OxyContin prescriptions on demand, and he sold them by the hundreds. And he was actually picked up by a detective who was looking for that. He had no idea what he was walking into. So on the day that they're there, Gosnell walks in, and I know this is true because I read the book, with food for his turtles. He had some kind of rare species of turtles in the waiting room.
Right.
And there were women anesthetized, possibly in some kind of trauma, waiting for abortions, and he's sitting there eating Chinese food, feeding his turtles, as if nothing's going on. It was just mind-boggling how numb this man was to human suffering and just pure hygiene. Sickening.
Right. I mean, he was definitely mentally disturbed in so many ways. I honestly believe he was just not all there, because even what he did, you had to be so demented and gone to do what he did to these babies and to these women.
And so callous. There was one baby that was so large, he joked. He said, this little guy could walk me to the bus stop on the corner as he snipped his neck.
Yes.
And he was
you hear that even with doctors now, abortionists that are giving testimony for one reason or another. They're just very matter-of-fact about what they do.
Yep, they are. It's not unusual. It's not unusual. Unfortunately, they would like you to believe that Gosnell was a monster, and he certainly is, and he was an aberration, and there are no other abortion clinics like that. But I have heard testimonies of people that have gone into abortion clinics and seen similar horrible things, like the baby that one of the nurses, one of the assistants, found swimming in a toilet. The baby drowned, but he was born into a toilet because he was so late term. And that is what George Tiller in Wichita, Kansas used to do. He would have the women, there was a woman on the O'Reilly Factor, I remember, on Fox News, talking about giving birth in the toilet and leaving the baby to drown. Now, women are arrested. There was a girl who went to her prom and delivered a baby into a toilet and drowned him and threw him in the trash and went back to her prom. And she was arrested for that. But if you go and you do that in an abortion clinic, despite the babies being beyond the legal age, in Pennsylvania it was 24 weeks, they did the abortion up to birth anyway. So that's when you say abortion is legal throughout all 9 months. It happens. It's not technically legal in some states, but there's always the doctor who changes the record. And Gosnell said with a smile on his face, those rules are for other people. I'm a doctor. I put on the record the age that I thought the baby should be developmentally, not the actual gestational age. And that's how he got around having 30-week, 33-week babies that he aborted. He's put 24.5 weeks for all the babies he aborted, past 24 weeks, as an excuse. So, and the health department winked at it. They were called in a couple of times. They saw these appalling conditions and said nothing. They said they got no complaints. Just do away with these people or they're going to be on our welfare roll, so let's just kill them. And that's what they did. But, what he did, what was illegal, and as, much as people can say, well, that's one case out of how many, I thought the most disturbing part of the testimony in court was what was legal. Exactly.
What wasn't legal, they admitted to, and he was going to pay the price for that crime. But what I was really disturbed by was what they confirmed to be legal, and that's okay. Well, when did you snip the neck? Was it now, this time, or that? If it was before, you're okay. If it's after, now we have a problem. That's what really bothered me. Just matter-of-factly talking about when.
That's right. It's a mere technicality, and it really brought home the point to the audience and the jury, who were all pro-abortion when they started, and they all turned pro-life. Because why? Because they heard the facts. And that's why this movie and that book and the trial were all banned from media. The trial had seat after seat for the press, and they were completely empty. And it was a local news person who took a picture of the empty benches and put it on Twitter and awakened the rest of us. I remember being part of that effort to say, why aren't the media covering this most prolific serial killer in American history? He killed more people than anyone in American history. Why aren't they at this trial? Why, we're all talking about Khashoggi right now and one man who was murdered. And I'm not justifying anyone's killing, but we're talking about hundreds, possibly thousands of viable babies and a couple of mothers as well who were killed, and nobody cared. So anyway, the Twitterverse caught on, and we had what's called a Twitter storm. We all agreed to tweet the hashtag Gosnell and the Gosnell trial for 2 hours on a Friday. And we made it trend. That is, so many people were tweeting about it, it became a leading news item. Then you forced, other than Fox News, which was covering, but you forced CNN, and Kristen Powers wrote an editorial in USA Today that really broke the story too. And all the different news organizations that are pro-abortion, that didn't want to cover it, New York Times, etc. And all of a sudden, it became a news item, and the reporters showed up. They were embarrassed by social media. We shone the light of day, and they started to come, and then people realized what was going on. So the book was written, ironically, by two Irish journalists that didn't consider themselves pro-life because they were in Pennsylvania. I believe it's Phelan McAleer and Mary McElhaney. I believe they're two different last names, but they're spouses. They were covering, I think it was fracking in Pennsylvania. And they saw a local news headline about this abortion trial. And at the time, abortion wasn't legal in Ireland. Of course, now it is. Well, will be soon. And they decided to be like the lone journalist sitting in the audience. And like the jury, they were flabbergasted at what was considered legal. And there was another witness who was an abortion doctor, a lady in the trial, remember that? Who described a typical late-term partial birth abortion like I just did. And the defense attorney for Gosnell actually tried to say that snipping the baby's neck was compassion because it saved the baby a death through asphyxiation after a live baby was born. So somehow snipping that baby's neck was an act of compassion. I mean, it was just so macabre. It's not to be believed. We can't believe we're living in this country sometimes.
Right, because she said that she would just leave it there and give it comfort care.
Yeah, that means being put in a container on the utility room shelf, and they asphyxiate. Nurse Jill Stanek was present at the abortion of a young baby with Down syndrome, and his heart was still beating, and he was so weak he couldn't even cry, and he was left in a utility room shelf to die basically of low oxygen. He could breathe, but not well enough, and she decided to hold him for the 45 minutes that he was given life on Earth so that somebody would love him for his time. And she gave testimony, very beautiful testimony in the Illinois State House. And guess what? It was Barack Obama, the state senator, a state legislator, who was the one leading the charge for partial birth abortion in Illinois, and the born law against giving life to these babies that are born mistakenly in abortion. So Barack Obama was a pro-abortion activist from the very, very start. He was our most pro-abortion president. So Jill has continued to give wonderful testimony to life throughout her career. But it takes sometimes being on the front lines and seeing what's happening for some people to become active. So I'd like to encourage anyone listening to this to go see Gosnell. The mainstream media tried to suppress it. It only got 8 reviews when other movies got hundreds of reviews. Yet it still made the top 10 movies over the first week it was out, and the #1 indie film last weekend. All right, October 14th and 15th. So it's amazing that a film that has been in limited release, it was only like 750 theaters, which is nothing. Those of us in Connecticut had to travel almost an hour to see it. And I know other people who traveled further, but they found packed theaters because pro-lifers were animated to support this film. And it has become one of the top 10. And theaters were dropping it even though it was that successful. Again, caving to pressure because the abortion industry, and it's an industry, they make money, folks, does not want you to know about Gosnell. But we still have freedom of press somewhat. I mean, technically, and we still have the ability to vote with our feet and with our purses. So let's go and support Gosnell. I will say it is not a gory film. You do not see the murdered babies. It's gross and it's disturbing, But trust me, you've seen worse. It's only rated PG-13 so that families can take their teenagers to see it. You are disturbed by the facts of the case. There's no doubt about it. But they don't fall into the trap that so many Hollywood films fall into of getting you with blood shooting everywhere. Like if you turn on TV, even a kids channel this time of year near Halloween, all you see is blood and gore and dead bodies. No, you don't see that. You don't see that in Gosnell. At one point, you see Dr. Gosnell used to keep sample jars, like urine sample jars, of severed feet. And we're talking some pretty fully developed large feet of the babies that he aborted. Allegedly, he said it was for DNA purposes. He's just had a sick fascination with death. He really did. Right. He does. He still does. He's in jail now for life, and he's acting as though he's there on vacation. His biggest problem when the couple interviewed him, the McElhenney family, it was that he missed the poetry class in the prison, and he couldn't. He's so scholarly and erudite, and he played Chopin when the police were invading. Not invading. They were sorry. They had a search warrant to go into his house. It looked like an invasion because they had to dress up in protective gear because it was so filthy. Right? They wore hazmat suits in his flea-infested basement where they found the corpse of a dead cat. I mean, this man is absolutely a monster. Well, I think that when you start killing human beings that are large enough to live on their own, you have to turn off your conscience somehow. And to the point that Gosnell did, he became a horrifying human being. And there's no person beyond the mercy of God. We should pray for him, but we should also be very vigilant that his story be known. A story like that can go a long way towards waking up Americans who would rather not know. They'd rather watch their TV shows and live life and not have to think about this. Just as slavery took a long time to convince the American public that human beings were being treated horribly. And what was it that woke them up? Uncle Tom's Cabin. It was a play about the plight of slaves that circulated the country and woke up the conscience of a nation. Right. So let Gosnell be the Uncle Tom's Cabin of the abortion movement so that Americans wake up and go and see it. And thank you, Claudia, for coming on the show today. I really appreciate it. And I'd love to have you again. In all full disclosure, I know Claudia from Eastern Connecticut Right to Life. She's been active there for years. And we're chairing a committee to start a pregnancy center, Pathways Pregnancy, Inc., in Norwich, Connecticut. And we're heading towards an opening mass on November 17th next month. We'll keep you posted. We'll see if we can bring an interview with Father Stephen Imperato of Priests for Life, who will be saying Mass. And I'm sure Father Pavone will be happy to know that you're still working hard in Connecticut, Claudia.
Well, yes.
You're a missionary, you know that. You're a missionary, a pro-life missionary to a very barren mission territory in Connecticut, although it's one of the most heavily Catholic states in the nation. It's also one of the bluest states, and the two senators are the most pro-abortion senators. They were virulent against Kavanaugh in the hearing, Senator Blumenthal and Senator Chris Murphy.
Oh, terrible.
It's embarrassing to have
Corey in.
Well, I hope
Matthew
so.
Corey.
Yep, he's running against Chris Murphy for the Senate.
Murphy.
And we have, so hopefully we can get some of a red wave going even here in Connecticut. 2 counties actually voted for Trump in the northeast corner and the northwest corner of the state. So the closer you get to the wealthy areas, the harder it is to convince people to vote their conscience and not vote for the pro-abortion men. So thank you so much. God bless you, and we'll see you next time on Living the Gospel of Life.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.